So when we look at portable liquid penetrant inspection, we're going to use aerosol for this. And I'm going to do type 1, which is fluorescent. We also, when you're doing your projects and as part of industry, you'll also at times use type 2, which is red visible. The process is the same all the way up until the inspection point when you wouldn't use the black light. You would just look at it visibly under visible, okay, using a red visible dye type 2 rather than fluorescent type 1. This is actually the same aerosol penetrant, or the same penetrant that we used in there, just in aerosol form. They're both called, they're both from Zygo, they're 60D. And then we have a cleaner, an aerosol cleaner. Now this we do have to use for one step in this process. Instead of using a water wash like we just did on the other example, we're going to use this cleaner, but you don't spray it directly on the part. It's used to essentially use a damp rag for cleaning. And then our developer also comes in a spray can as well. And this is a solvent-based developer. It's actually a very similar product to what's in there, just in a quick drying solvent rather than dry powder. So I brought the same part out. I did wash it off with alcohol while we were in there. I pre-cleaned it with that. For aerosol, you do want to pre-clean it with the aerosol cleaner though as well. This is a little bit stronger cleaner. And so I'm just going to spray the part. Again, I'm going to focus on the outside because it's more visible for our demo here. But if I spray it, kind of let it sit there, and then when we're trying to kind of pre-clean, I am going to hit those areas of interest before we start the process. And then I'm going to dry it off, the surface. And I do want to let it dry, but because it is solvent-based, the stuff dries very, very, very quickly. We don't need an oven like we do for the water wash method. And once it's dry, I'm going to go ahead and apply the penetrant. Now, again, we dipped it last time for aerosol. We just want to coat the entire part. And so we want to have a thick enough coating that it's a liquid where capillary action can pull it down into the cracks. However, you don't want to go so thick with it that it makes it hard to clean it off. Okay, the more you put on the surface, the more you're going to have to clean off once it's had an opportunity to dwell. So this is the point where we would stop, and we would need to allow it to dwell for about 10 to 20 minutes. Again, for demo purposes, I'm not going to be able to give it that much time. Okay. So after we've allowed our part to dwell, we need to clean off the excess. Okay. And when we clean off the excess, we're going to start with a dry rag. And we're going to wipe it, and we want to avoid touching it in those areas of interest. You want to wipe it. You never want to sit and blot it, because blotting can actually pull that dye back out of the cracks. So you don't want to leave your rag kind of sitting in one spot for too long. It's going to absorb like a paper towel. So we want to keep it moving across the surface. And you can see I'm wiping in kind of the same direction, in one direction. I'm not going back and forth. I'm not sitting here scrubbing it or something like that. So just gentle, single direction. You can kind of go, you can change the direction. Getting my different sides. Now I'm just getting a clean rag just because there's dye. And this is where you can see the more dye you put on the surface, the more effort this is going to take. I can change my direction between, I just don't want to sit there and scrub in a circle or scrub around. But just kind of do single direction wipes all the way around. I am going to wipe over those areas. I know that this has cracks in the welds, but I want to make sure I don't have a bunch of excess dye pooling in the welds. And so I am going to go over the welds with the paper towel, but I'm not going to let the paper towel sit there where it can blot that dye back out. And again, right now, I'm just trying to get as much of the excess on the surface as possible with a dry rag. I'm holding it from the inside since my area of interest is on the outside of this case. The last step in the cleaning process is to use a solvent damp rag to clean that off. So I'm going to grab my aerosol solvent, and I'm never at this point going to spray it on the part. I'm just going to use it to make a rag wet with it. And then I'm going to do kind of a final pass or two in each area with this damp rag. And I can kind of judge how well or whether I've under or overwashed by getting out my blacklight flashlight and checking it, because I don't want a ton of dye on the surface, but I also don't want to clean it so much. And so if I put my blacklight on it, you can see there is some streaking where I've been wiping the dye off. I probably need to go just a little bit more, a couple more passes. I'll do another damp rag for that. And this is, again, this is rough steel. This is a fairly hard part to get totally clean. You're always going to have some non-relevant where the dye is going to be kind of stuck to the surface due to the fact that it is rough. And the cleaner's getting a little empty here. Good. So once I've done my cleaning, once I've decided that it is good, and I probably could use just a little more, but for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and leave it how it is. I'm going to move into my developing stage. And so I'm going to get my aerosol-based developer out. I'm going to take it out. This one has a bead in it. The aerosol penetrant and cleaner don't really have beads in them. They really don't come out of suspension too much. But the aerosol cleaner, this is a suspension inside of the aerosol developer, excuse me. It's a developer that is suspended in the solvent. And so it does settle to the bottom of the can. So we want to shake it up fairly well. Typically 30 seconds and then before you need it. I shook these up earlier before I brought them out. So it's not a critical once you've been using it. But applying this is kind of like when you are painting. You want to get a good spray started. You never want to be pointed at your object when you start or stop spraying. You always want to be moving past it while you're spraying. So I'm going to start off to one side, and I'm going to make passes, and the surface will appear wet for a second, and then it'll start to dry and take on kind of a white surface. Okay, and so this one does leave a visible white surface, whereas the dry powder does not. That does a couple things. One, it lets you see when the developer is dried and how thick it is. The other part is it creates a light colored background to provide a contrast, a white contrast with the yellow, green fluorescent dye. Or the red dye, if you use that. The red dye uses the same developer. So we have the same developer, we can use it with the red dye or the fluorescent dye. So again, I'm going to coat this side. And actually coat my head with those corners a little bit. You can see I'm never starting or stopping it while I'm pointed at it. I'm always keeping it moving as I go by. Hopefully what you learned in structures when you did some painting. And then I'm going to let it dry for a second, just kind of see. And you can see I'm getting kind of a white background. Now, the nice part about this is if you spray it on, and when you go to do your inspection, you realize that you didn't get quite enough of it, you can always spray a little bit more. However, if you spray it too thick to start with, it can actually be so thick that it won't draw the dye all the way through it, because we're now using that blotting action to pull the dye back out of the cracks. And if you put a real thick coat on, that dye will never get all the way through the developer layer. So we want to have enough that it creates that surface, nice clean white background to look at, but not so much that it hides potential indications, especially very small ones. Let's say we're pretty good on this one. again, it should dry to a nice uniform white surface that we can use for inspection. And so this is another step where now we would need to let it develop, or sometimes you do hear well. We need to let it develop for about 10 to 20 minutes. And in the nature of time during a demo, I can't do that. So we're going to just leave it here for a second. I'm going to ask someone, you guys go shut the lights off back there. We'll leave, now we'll still have the exterior lights on, but it should be dark enough that we can start to see, or we can go into the darkened room or something like that if we need to. But if I start doing an inspection of it, you'll see that we do have a certain amount of dye and it's stuck to the surface because it is a rough surface. And I probably didn't clean it as well as I should have if I was being a little more careful. But if I start looking more closely, and particularly those areas of interest, I can see some more definite lines, and now I haven't let it dwell or develop for 10 to 20 minutes. But I can see some lines starting to form, some more definite lines starting to form in areas, cracks on here. Okay, that might be areas of interest. So there's some forming right there at the top of this well. You can see there's bright spots kind of forming where there are voids in the wells, or little pockmarks in the wells. As well as along the edges of these corner wells. And so I've got little cracks right here. So this is kind of the one that's showing up the best right now. There is excess dye that was kind of trapped. So. Quarter inch long, a little over quarter. Yeah, dye that is pulled up. Those are the kind of indications that we're looking for. Those that are watching the demo, hopefully this comes out okay. But there's a crack up here in the top area. We're starting to see a little more along this well too. This is the big one that we saw when we did mag particle on this, and when we did liquid finish right the bench. And so there are some areas there. That's such a big crack, it's almost visible with the naked eye. So here it's causing a lot of dye to kind of pool and not causing as much of a definite indication, but more of a fuzzy kind of just such a big blot that it almost looks like excess dye. But those real sharp lines are what we're really looking for. So the kind of the small cracks that aren't necessarily visible to the naked eye. The other part of it too, I didn't let it sit and develop for the full time. So again, there may be some more indications that become visible as this sits here and it's given time to finish developing. But then when you're done, you would want to clean your part off. Just don't mind, flip the lights back on. Post cleaning, you can do it alcohol. You can also take them into the wash tank, fully submerge them, scrub them real good. That works too. The alcohol does do a better job of, there we go, does do a better job of kind of dissolving what's on there. So I always prefer, if you do, kind of do an alcohol bath, clean with it first, and then take it in, clean it in a wash tank with the mineral spirits afterwards.